word prolific more than applies to television legend Norman Lear, the visionary behind any number of memorable TV shows. But prolific hardly conveys the pivotal role he played in transforming this medium.
Norman Lear died in 2023 at 101 years old. His family stayed quiet for days, planning something no one expected. 2 years later, the shocking truth came out. Behind his modest lifestyle was a secret art collection worth over $50 million. His Beverly Hills home was actually a private museum with masterpieces by famous artists. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. His $200 million estate came with conditions that stunned Hollywood. His 6 children couldn't just inherit the money. They had to earn it in ways that changed everything about family wealth. Norman Lear was born on July 27, 1922, in New Haven, Connecticut, into a home already marked by turmoil. His father, Herman Lear, was a hustler who dealt in fake bonds and schemes that promised more than they could deliver. When Norman was only 9, his father was sent to prison for fraud, leaving the boy to grow up fast. Visits to the prison, whispers at family gatherings, and the sudden expectation that he step into the role of man of the house shaped him deeply. Those early wounds never really left him. Years later, he would pour those experiences into characters like Archie Bunker, whose flaws and loud presence echoed the chaos of his own father. The lesson that the American dream could quickly turn into a nightmare came even earlier. Herman once opened a furniture store, collected advance payments from families, and then vanished with their money. Norman saw the fury of neighbors who had trusted his father and the humiliation that settled over his own family. It was not just a scandal, but a brutal education. From that moment, Norman carried with him a sharp eye for the cracks behind authority and the dark side of ambition. That outlook would one day fuel his satirical television, where the surface of respectability was often stripped away to show what was hidden underneath. In 1942, at 20 years old, Norman joined the U.S. Army Air Forces to fight in World War II. He became a radio operator and gunner on Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses, flying 52 combat missions across the Mediterranean. The danger was constant. Tail gunners often survived only a handful of missions. Yet Norman kept flying. He saw friends killed, watched the skies turn deadly with fire, and flew over towns scarred by the Holocaust. The hatred he witnessed left him with a lifelong mission to fight prejudice and bigotry wherever he could. The war hardened him, but also gave him the urgency that later showed in his writing. When the war ended, Norman came home searching for direction. He applied to USC's film school, certain it would open the door to Hollywood. Instead, he was rejected. With no other options, he began selling encyclopedias door to door. It seemed like failure, but the experience became training ground. Every knock on a stranger's door taught him how to read people in seconds, how to shape a story so it mattered, and how to win attention in a living room. He didn't know it at the time, but this work gave him the tools to connect with millions once he reached television. In 1945, broke and uncertain, he gambled almost everything he had left. With just $40 in his pocket, he bought a ticket to see comedian Danny Thomas perform in Miami. After the show, Norman somehow talked his way backstage and convinced Thomas to let him write jokes for $50 a week. It was a bold move that changed everything. That moment turned a struggling veteran into a writer whose work would one day shape American culture. His first big television job, though, nearly ended his career before it began. In 1950, Norman was hired to write for the variety show Ford Star Review. What should have been his breakthrough quickly turned into a nightmare. Variety complained that the show seldom hit top stride, and another critic said his sketches sank into mediocrity. The word unwatchable was repeated in reviews. NBC executives almost canceled the show, and Norman considered giving up on television altogether. Still, he stayed. That painful failure taught him resilience and the value of honest criticism, lessons that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Soon after, he and his partner Ed Simmons joined the Colgate Comedy Hour, writing for Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. The duo was a sensation in front of audiences, but behind the scenes, their partnership was crumbling. Norman saw the fights, the clashing egos, and the eventual breakup that ended one of the most famous acts in comedy. Watching that chaos gave him insight into how conflict could fuel creativity. He later used that same dynamic in shows like All in the Family and The Jeffersons, where characters with clashing views created unforgettable television. By the mid-1950s, Norman was writing for The George Gobel Show. Here, he discovered something that would define his career. Safe, easy laughs got polite applause, but when a sketch pushed boundaries or made the audience uncomfortable, the laughter became louder and more lasting. Norman realized that comedy had more power when it told the truth, even when that truth was hard to hear. It was the start of what he called comedy with consequence, a style that would later revolutionize American sitcoms. In 1958, he learned how costly honesty could be. While writing for The Andy Williams Show, he slipped in jokes that criticized the lingering fear of McCarthyism. Network censors and sponsors quickly cut him off, and within months, he was fired. For Norman, the firing was more than a lost paycheck. It confirmed that he would always clash with those who wanted safe, empty entertainment. He refused to back down, and that defiant spirit would become the heart of his career. Later that same year, he partnered with Bud Yorkin to form Tandem Productions. At first, their work was dismissed as too real by networks that preferred polished, cheerful stories. But Norman and Bud refused to compromise. They wanted shows that reflected real struggles, not sugar-coated versions of life. That persistence eventually gave birth to All in the Family, Sanford and Son, and The Jeffersons. The story of Norman Lear's rise to the top of American television begins with an idea borrowed from across the Atlantic. In the 1960s, Lear came across a British sitcom called Till Death Us Do Part, a biting comedy about a working-class man whose views were as sharp as they were controversial. Some say Lear discovered it after reading about it in Variety, while others believe Carol O'Connor, who had traveled to the UK, helped push the idea to America. Either way, Lear was convinced it could work in the United States. The networks, however, wanted nothing to do with it. Executives were terrified of a show that openly poked fun at racism, sexism, and politics. Lear and his team pitched the idea 47 times without success. They even filmed 2 pilots for ABC, one in 1968 called Justice for All, and another in 1969 called Those Were the Days. Both were rejected. Executives felt the lead character was too abrasive, too politically incorrect, and too risky for a nation used to the gentle families of shows like The Brady Bunch. For 4 years, Lear rewrote, recast, and pleaded, until finally, CBS took a chance. Even then, it happened only because the network had just cleared away its rural comedies to modernize its image. The green light came with shaking hands, but it changed American television forever. Casting Archie Bunker nearly ended the project before it began. Carol O'Connor, a classically trained actor, was deeply uneasy about playing such a bigoted man. He worried the role could encourage prejudice instead of mocking it. O'Connor walked away from negotiations 3 times, convinced the character was too ugly for comedy. Only after long talks did Lear persuade him that Archie would expose ignorance rather than endorse it. O'Connor later admitted it was the hardest work of his career. He had to stay in character constantly, never relaxing, because Archie was so real to American viewers. People recognized him in their own families. In the end, O'Connor's performance became the heart of the show, though it nearly never happened. When All in the Family finally premiered on January 12, 1971, the fear inside CBS was so intense that some executives considered pulling it hours before airtime. The show was about to bring race, class, and gender debates into living rooms that had never seen such things on television. To brace viewers, CBS aired a disclaimer. It explained that the show would highlight human prejudices in a mature and humorous way to show how absurd they were. The disclaimer didn't stop the panic. Executives worried about angry letters, government investigations, and advertiser boycotts. Their fears proved correct. The premiere sparked immediate uproar, but it also proved the country was ready for a different kind of television. The controversies only grew. In the show's first season, the 5th episode made history by airing the first uncensored use of the word "damn" in American primetime television. Viewers sent CBS 6,000 complaint letters in just weeks, the most the network had ever received. The uproar reached Congress, where hearings were held on decency and the direction of television. From then on, censors examined every line of every script. What today might sound harmless was in 1971 a thunderbolt that forced the culture to decide how far entertainment could go. The ratings at first seemed to confirm the network's doubts. The show opened ranked 54th out of 96 programs. But the storm of debate drew more and more people to watch the summer reruns. By the end of the first season, All in the Family was the #1 show in America. It held that spot for 5 years in a row, the first show ever to do so in Nielsen history. A series once on the edge of being canceled had turned into a cultural event that dominated national conversation. Lear was not done pushing boundaries. In November 1972, his show Maude aired a 2-part episode titled Maude's Dilemma. It told the story of a 47-year-old woman choosing to have an abortion 2 months before Roe v. Wade legalized it nationwide. The decision sent shockwaves across the country. CBS affiliates received thousands of furious calls. Lear got death threats, and bomb scares were reported at network offices. The Vatican publicly condemned the show, urging Catholics to boycott CBS and its sponsors. Even under this pressure, Lear refused to back down. He insisted that real women faced these choices, and television had a duty to reflect that reality. The fallout divided families, enraged church leaders, and even split the show's own writers. But Lear stood firm. The episodes aired, making Maude one of the most controversial shows in American history. In 1974, Lear launched Good Times, the first sitcom about a black family living in a Chicago housing project. At first it was praised, but soon civil rights leaders and groups like the NAACP criticized it. They argued that the comedy leaned too heavily on stereotypes and exaggerated portrayals of poverty and crime. The catchphrase, "Din o' meat," from the character J.D. Jaiji became wildly popular. But critics said it turned the show into a joke at the expense of black families. Esther Roll and John Amos, who played the parents, pushed back hard. Rolla warned that children watching the show needed to believe they could dream beyond the ghetto. The debates forced CBS to edit storylines, while also sparking national conversations about how television portrayed black life. Another Lear hit, The Jeffersons, broke barriers when it showed Tom and Helen Willis, a black man and a white woman, sharing an on-screen kiss. Interracial marriage was still rare on American television, and many stations in the South refused to air the episode. Records show that 67 affiliates refused, costing CBS millions in lost advertising. Sponsors in conservative regions pulled their support, but Lear and the network refused to edit the scene. The kiss was a bold statement for equality, though it also revealed how deeply divided the nation remained. By 1976, Lear tested the limits of television again with Mary Hartman. Mary Hartman. After all three major networks rejected it as too strange and too risky, he took the unusual step of selling it directly to independent stations. It became the first successful nightly primetime syndicated show, drawing millions of viewers and creating a new business model for adult-themed programming. Its storylines tackled infidelity, depression, and even mass murder, shocking audiences while also building a loyal following. One episode, where a character drowned in a bowl of chicken soup, became one of television's most infamous moments. By 1977, Norman Lear was at his peak. In a single week, 6 of his shows were on the air. All in the Family, Maude, The Jeffersons, Good Times, One Day at a Time, and Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman. Together, they filled more than 120 minutes of prime time, about 13% of the entire weekly network schedule. At that time, no other producer had more than 2 hit shows on the air. Lear's programs reached tens of millions of viewers each night. According to a 1975 Nielsen report, more adults in America watched his shows in a given week than attended church on Sunday or tuned into the evening news. For a few years, he had more power to shape American culture than most elected officials. Between 1980 and 1985, Norman Lear found himself under constant attack from the newly mobilized religious right. Jerry Falwell, the powerful televangelist who founded the Moral Majority, singled him out with a personal campaign that was relentless. Falwell called Lear the #1 enemy of the American family, and even the single most dangerous man in America. These were not just insults for headlines. They led to organized boycotts of advertisers that supported Lear's shows like All in the Family, Maude, and Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman. The Moral Majority pushed nationwide letter-writing drives, urging major companies to drop sponsorships and warning networks to cancel or censor programs that reflected Lear's progressive and secular vision. Falwell claimed Lear's sitcoms were forcing incest, adultery, and homosexuality into American homes. For Lear, this was more than criticism. It was a coordinated effort that threatened the foundation of network television and made his name a symbol of what conservatives called cultural decline. The attacks quickly grew more dangerous. By 1981, Lear was receiving chilling threats. Some messages warned he would be hunted down if he kept promoting what critics called anti-Christian values. The fear was real. To fight back, he joined with civil rights leaders and clergy to create People for the American Way. The group became a major defender of the First Amendment and of religious and civic pluralism. It was not just about politics. It was about protecting his life and the values he believed in. The hostility reached the White House. Under Ronald Reagan, the administration carried out an informal blacklist against producers who were seen as hostile to American values. Lear was at the top of that list. Years later, Reagan's communications director admitted that the White House pressured both networks and advertisers to distance themselves from Lear. The goal was to cut off his funding and silence his voice. It worked. Several of his shows faced sudden cancellations or were forced to tone down their criticism of authority, religion, and race. Television in the early 1980s grew more cautious, and the political satire that once thrived under Lear became risky to produce. At the same time, Lear was struggling with the changing tastes of American audiences. In 1982, he launched Gloria, a spin-off starring Sally Struthers. But the show lasted only 1 season. It was no match for lighter, escapist hits like The A-Team and Family Ties. The Reagan years created a mood of optimism, and viewers now wanted comfort rather than confrontation. Lear's sharp, socially conscious approach felt out of step. Then came the dramatic sale of his company. In June 1985, Lear and his partner, Jerry Perenchio, sold Embassy Communications, which included Tandem Productions, to the Coca-Cola Company. The price was staggering, $485 million in cash and stock. At the time, it was one of the largest deals in Hollywood history. Lear walked away from the company that had shaped American television. But what looked like a triumph soon turned sour. Coca-Cola mismanaged the assets, broke up the company, and sold off pieces. Bankruptcies followed. Lawsuits piled up. By the early 1990s, Lear was facing personal financial exposure he had never imagined when he signed the deal. The empire he built collapsed, leaving him with bitter consequences from a corporate game he thought he had won. Lear made headlines again in 2000 when he and tech entrepreneur David Hayden bought a rare Dunlap broadside copy of the Declaration of Independence at Sotheby's. The price was $8.14 million, the highest ever paid for an American historical document. The backstory amazed the public. The document had been discovered in 1989, hidden behind a $4 flea market painting. Critics accused Lear of turning national history into a rich man's trophy, but he refused to keep it locked away. Instead, he sent it on a 50-state tour for 10 years and created the Declare Yourself campaign that registered millions of young voters. For Lear, the purchase was about civic engagement. Still, the debate never went away over whether such treasures should belong to individuals. The years after selling Embassy were hard on Lear. Between 1985 and the 1990s, he pitched at least 12 pilots. Not one was picked up. Networks said his shows were too topical, too serious, or too old-fashioned. The man once seen as the boldest voice on television now faced closed doors. Industry whispers declared his era over, and the sharp, issue-driven sitcoms he created were no longer welcome. Then came a twist no one expected. In the early 1990s, Lear had invested in Castle Rock Entertainment. The company went on to create Seinfeld. When the show entered syndication, it generated around $1.5 billion in revenue. In 1993, Castle Rock was sold to Turner Broadcasting. And by 1999, Lear's share of the profits gave him a fortune. After years of financial struggle, the Seinfeld success allowed him to reinvent himself as a philanthropist and civic leader. While his career took dramatic turns, his personal life was just as complex. He married 3 times and had 6 children. His first marriage, to Charlotte Rosen, lasted from 1943 to 1956. His second, to Frances Loeb, lasted from 1956 to 1985 and drew heavy media attention. Rumors of open relationships and Hollywood wife-swapping surrounded the couple during the 1970s and 1980s. His third marriage, to Lynn Davis in 1987, was steadier, but gossip about Lear's private life continued. His daughter Kate once described the tense atmosphere in the Lear household, where Norman and Frances would spar in front of guests. His divorce from Frances was one of the most expensive in American history. In 1985, Frances won a $112 million settlement. She used part of that money, more than $25 million, to launch a feminist magazine called Lear's. The first issue sold out, and circulation soon reached 250,000. By the early 1990s, it grew to 500,000. But the magazine eventually collapsed in 1994 after heavy spending and unstable leadership. Lear's 6 children, Ellen, Kate, Maggie, Benjamin, Brianna, and Madeline, grew up under the shadow of his fame. Some admitted feeling overlooked, saying their father was more available to America than to his own family. Lear himself later confessed he was not always present for them. Through all of this, Lear devoted himself to therapy and self-exploration. He described himself as a therapy junkie, trying everything from psychoanalysis to transcendental meditation and EST training. He admitted therapy became an obsession, but he also believed it helped him confront fear and shape the vision that defined his work. In his own words, he chose to keep moving forward, never letting fear stop him, even when the obstacles seemed overwhelming. In 2017, Norman Lear decided to bring back one of his own classics. He reimagined his 1970s sitcom One Day at a Time for Netflix. And many wondered if the formula that once defined primetime family television would still work in a world ruled by streaming. It didn't just work, it created something new. The show centered on a Cuban-American family in Los Angeles, led by a single mother who was also a veteran. It took on issues that felt urgent, from LGBTQ+ acceptance and mental health to immigration and systemic racism, all while balancing humor with real emotion. Audiences loved it, and critics called it one of the best shows of 2017. The series earned 4 Primetime Emmy nominations, winning 2 for picture editing in 2019 and 2020. The cast also brought home major awards from the Imagen Foundation. For Norman Lear, who was 95 at the time, it wasn't just a return to television, but proof that he could still change the medium nearly 50 years after creating the original series. It also turned out to be his last big project before his death in 2023. Even as he returned to scripted television, Lear became one of the most outspoken voices in Hollywood during the Trump presidency. What shocked many was not just his words, but his age. Well into his 90s, he openly called Donald Trump a thorough fool and compared him to his most infamous creation, Archie Bunker, saying Trump was the middle finger of the American right hand. He warned against bigotry, anti-immigrant sentiment, and what he believed was a dangerous longing for a past that never really existed. At 95, he refused to attend the White House reception for his Kennedy Center honor as an act of protest. In 2022, after turning 100, he condemned Trump's anti-Semitic remarks, saying they took him back to when he was 9 years old, a time when open hate was common. His blend of personal history and public activism made him a powerful voice for democracy, showing that age could never silence conviction. Lear wasn't finished surprising people. In 2019, and again in 2021, ABC aired live in front of a studio audience, which brought back episodes of All in the Family, The Jeffersons, and Good Times. Actors performed these classic scripts live on television in front of a studio audience, recreating the energy of the 1970s. The response was electric. Lear, at 97 years old, won the Emmy for Outstanding Variety Special in 2019, becoming the oldest person ever to win a Primetime Emmy. On stage, he joked, thank you, and holy sh*t. It's 90 years later, and I feel much the same." The specials introduced his sharp, socially conscious writing to a new generation who discovered how timely his work still felt. What almost no one knew was that behind the scenes, Lear had been building a secret art collection with his wife Lynn. From the 1970s until 2023, they quietly collected modern masterpieces by artists like David Hockney, Ed Ruscha, Roy Lichtenstein, Robert Rauschenberg, and Willem de Kooning. For decades, few realized the scale or value of what they owned. When the collection was revealed in 2024 through Christie's, experts were stunned. The works were valued at over $50 million, with the final sales total surpassing $60 million. The revelation shocked even insiders, especially since Lear had long been seen as living modestly. Their Beverly Hills home turned out to be more like a private museum. Walls were designed around massive works, including an enormous Rauschenberg that needed a custom-built wall of its own. The Lears often hosted quiet gatherings where artists, collectors, and celebrities viewed pieces rarely seen outside major museums. Lear himself would sometimes guide guests through the house, telling stories about the art. These were not public exhibitions, but intimate evenings that created a sense of connection between the art and the people invited to see it. One of the most famous pieces was David Hockney's A Lawn Being Sprinkled. Lear bought it in 1978 for $64,000, a huge sum for the time. In 2024, it was projected to sell for as much as $35 million. The painting, a simple scene of sprinklers watering a lawn, became the centerpiece of the Lear collection. His eye for talent was clear. He bought the work before Hockney had fully risen to global fame, and decades later, it stood as proof of Lear's remarkable instinct. Another prized piece was Ed Ruscha's Truth, painted in 1973. It showed the word truth in fiery red letters floating in blue and white clouds. Lear hung it above his writing desk for decades, saying it reminded him every day to keep his stories honest. He told friends and actors that truth was the highest calling of any storyteller. The painting, valued at $9.2 million, became known not just as an art piece, but as a guiding force in Lear's creative life. When the collection was sold at Christie's in May 2024, the 7 biggest pieces alone brought in $60.2 million. The Lear family immediately pledged much of the money to causes close to Norman's heart, including People for the American Way, arts education, and grassroots campaigns for voting rights and social justice. The move was bold, showing that Lear's passion for activism would live on through philanthropy. On December 5, 2023, Norman Lear died at his Los Angeles home at the age of 101. He had lived exactly 101 years and 131 days. His family kept the news quiet at first, planning a private service and controlling every detail of what was shared. Insiders later said this was carefully prepared so that his death would not only be mourned, but would also highlight his values and unfinished work. When the announcement was finally made, it came with details of philanthropic plans, a surprising inheritance structure, and major political donations. The family's ability to keep everything secret in a world of constant leaks impressed even Hollywood insiders. The inheritance plan itself was unlike anything Hollywood had seen. Lear's 6 children did not receive direct inheritances. Instead, the estate, estimated at $200 million, was placed in trusts with strict conditions. Each child would only receive distributions if they committed to years of public service, such as working in nonprofits, civic engagement, or public interest journalism. If they refused, their share would go to charity. Lear believed wealth should be tied to meaningful contribution, not entitlement, and he wanted his children to continue making an impact. Hollywood insiders called it a blueprint for a new kind of family legacy. Even after his death, his work reached new audiences. Amazon released Clean Slate, a series Lear had greenlit at the age of 100. It told the story of Harry Slate, an old-fashioned Alabama car wash owner who reconnects with his child, now a proud trans woman named Desiree, after more than 2 decades apart. The show, starring Laverne Cox, was the first sitcom built around a transgender lead character. It tackled family estrangement and prejudice while keeping Lear's signature mix of humor and honesty. Critics praised it, noting that Lear had once again pushed television into new territory. Behind-the-scenes interviews revealed that the idea had started as a Sanford and Son reboot, but was reshaped into a trans-inclusive story because of Lear's determination. It showed that even at 100, he was still driving television forward.